so we have 40 people taking this course. They want to go out in the world and help the world's drylands, John, and we're just thrilled that we have you to be able to join us. You're one of our heroes in the movement here, and there's everybody here, of course, will be going out and stimulating other people. So there'll always be ripple effects. You have a lot of ripple effects that are spreading out throughout the world, and between all of us, I have full faith that the ecosystems will be restored, and the more humans that jump on this, then the better. All hands on deck. That's the great work of our times, as you say. And boy, we have some people here from the Colville Reservation that teach school kids, and so they're gonna, and other people here too. So getting it out to the children is so good.
Okay, well, tell me what to do. Are you ready for me?
We're ready. Go for it.
All right. Well, it's an honor to be asked, of course, and I think you guys, all of you 40 people, and Skeeter and Penny and everybody else, Jonathan, Cabot, Leo, everybody there, you guys are my heroes, because we're not talking about a theoretical problem. We're talking about a physical problem. And so only the people who actually do the work are really doing the work. So we have to physically restore degraded landscapes on a planetary scale. That's the only possibility that's left for human civilization at this time. We've explored the dark side, and we need to go to the light quickly and go back to the garden. But we also need to understand the difference between domesticated landscapes and evolutionary succession. So I'm gonna try to share my screen. It seems like, tell me if this is not working, in which case we'll have to meditate a little bit on what to do. But if this is working, I have provided in the chat all of the URLs. So if this doesn't work, tell me, and we'll just have a conversation. But here's the first thing that I wanted to tell you.
I'm John Liu, and I'm really happy to have this opportunity to speak with you today remotely. I'm also very grateful to the Common Land Foundation and the Mustard Seed Trust that make it possible for me to do this work. I have been a professional witness and a student of transformational change in politics, economics, culture, and ecology over my entire adult life. In studying ecology, I learned that evolutionary succession over billions of years led to multidimensional symbiotic systems in dynamic equilibrium. This process is accumulative and leads to the creation, constant filtration, and continuous renewal of the Earth's atmosphere, the freshwater system, the fertility of the soil, and the amazing biodiversity on the Earth. Observing and analyzing how human beings over historical time have degraded natural Earth systems is of critical importance. Most emphasis has been placed on the egregious emission of CO2 and other greenhouse gases. This is both an inconvenient truth and a partial one. I have directly observed that human impacts from devegetation and other types of alteration of the Earth's biological systems allow solar radiation to directly hit the surface of the Earth, raising surface temperatures by very large amounts. This phenomenon unnaturally creates thermal drafts, driving moisture into the upper atmosphere, where it is no longer nurturing the soil and the vegetation, but instead is twice as impactful as CO2 as a greenhouse gas. we do not only have to restore carbon equilibrium, we also must restore the hydrological cycle, the pedosphere, and specifically the habitat for microbial and fungal communities that form the basis of the web of life by making minerals and nutrients from geologic materials bioavailable to plant and animal life forms. The restoration of the Loess Plateau has shown that by increasing biodiversity, biomass, and accumulated organic matter, it is possible to restore lower surface temperatures, holding moisture near the earth. By restoring the canopy, solar radiation is interrupted, creating microclimates that help recharge the lower hydrological cycle. It is possible to restore large-scale degraded landscapes that have been degraded over vast areas and over long historic time frames. Ecological restoration is not theoretical. It is physical, and the actions of millions and billions of people are needed to reverse human impact on the climate, making ecological restoration also the way to ensure full employment, food security, physical and psychological health. When ecological restoration is properly valued, logically it must become the central intention of human civilization and the basis of human economy, thus removing the perverse incentive to degrade the Earth's life support systems and instead incentivizing actions that are in the interest of all people and all life on Earth. People all over the world are already choosing to work on ecosystem restoration. The need is urgent, and those in positions of power need to humbly serve everyone who puts their hands in the soil to consciously revegetate and restore. Valuing restoration higher than materialism and honoring the wisdom and stewardship of the indigenous cultures, who have always known that all life is sacred, is a much-needed paradigm shift. This is the answer to both restoring the Earth's ecological function and also to bringing justice to those who have been and continue to be so badly abused by the spread of false beliefs based on selfishness and ignorance. In restoring the Earth's natural ecological function, we all have a role to play. If we all play together, it's going to be both effective and a whole lot more fun. Thank you for listening.
That short presentation was given to FAO about a few weeks ago now, and I have put into the chat and given to Brendan many more various things. Let's see what they are. Actually, I'll just look in the chat. So what we've seen in the chat are, what I have in the chat for you is forests keep drylands working, forests of hope, and especially the section on Renee Holler in Kenya, because this shows the use of Cassarina pine for growing organic layers on bedrock. So this is what I've been seeing in Egypt and other places. We can take certain incredibly hardy species and use them as a pioneer species, and that later they will be much reduced or gone because the legacy genome will return. And we can stimulate the legacy genome, but we can only do that when you have soil and when you have water. And so the situation now is really how to make microclimates. How do you make microclimates in a specific place, especially when you have terrible conditions? So I think it's important to realize if you're feeling hot winds, high-speed winds that are just really hot, and that is a serious clue. And we were talking yesterday, and I call this ecological forensics, that you've walked into the crime scene and, there are bodies everywhere and there's blood everywhere. And you're like, what happened here? And so if you go into a place where the name is Big Springs or the land of milk and honey or something like that, and it looks like a desert, you've got some clues right there. And then if you feel this hot wind coming and it just dries you out and you need to drink tremendous amounts of water, but you never have to urinate, you need to think about, what does this mean? It means that you're desiccating, that these hot winds are sucking the moisture out of your body. And that's what happens to the biomass, because we are biomass and vascular plants are biomass. So you're going to have something that is so ridiculously robust that it will break the wind, stop the wind, and slow it. And what happens then, what I noticed was that in all the places where you got back any sort of vegetative cover, any sort of canopy, it could be a grass canopy, it could be a brush canopy, or it could be a tree canopy. When you have this, your surface temperatures are going to be massively lower. And when I say massively lower, I mean massively lower, because it's unthinkable that, like, in the outliers, it's just ludicrously enormous. So let me see if I can just bring something up as a still image. See if I'm able to do this. Let me see here. Sorry for this. I'm 68 years old. I'm getting ready. I'm starting to prepare for 70, and I haven't quite got my mind around that yet.
Hey, same here, John.
Yeah.
But while you're doing that, I just want to say that what he's referring to is that wind can dry out and desiccate an area faster than hot sun. So I love that he's focusing, like, the thing to pay attention to are these hot winds. And when you were talking about, big springs, I also think about the Fertile Crescent. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to show you this. So this is and I've put this link into the chat too. It's called the Great Green Wall of China. And this is where something else that the Chinese have done, which is just ridiculous in a way. This is the Taklamakan Desert in the northwest. Taklamakan means you go in, but you don't come out. So this is famous for, like, people dying by wandering off in there and just dying. So if you'll notice, you have a shelter belt, which has been built directly through the middle of this desert. And it's, I don't remember how many, it's something, hundreds of kilometers. I think it's 400 and something kilometers through the middle of the desert. So it's just a ridiculous idea that you would do this. But the fact that you can do this is of critical importance. And then there is data that comes out of this. So first of all, almost all of these plants, they identified a number of plants which are halophytes. They're salt-tolerant plants. And there is, if you ever get a chance, definitely go here, because there is a botanical gardens that is below sea level. It's like Death Valley. It's a botanical gardens for the plants that could survive in Death Valley. And this is where the Chinese have no limits. You know, they're just insane in their ability to imagine this kind of stuff. So what is interesting about this, on the surface of the sand in the desert, in July, it will be 70 degrees centigrade. But below the canopy, it will be 25 degrees centigrade. So this is ludicrously different. This is 45 degree temperature differentials. Now, that is an outlier. But all over Africa, I've seen easily 15 degrees temperature differentials. Even in well, what you would call what is it? Oh gosh, I'm really getting to be 70. It's not rigid. What is it? It's brittle systems. In these brittle systems, where there's very little water, then if you have a canopy, you'll find below that canopy, the temperatures will be 10, 15 degrees, 12, 15 degrees difference. So you need to be able to measure that. By the way, there is some new stuff which is coming up because of the Sinai Peninsula. So we also need to talk about the Sinai Peninsula. And this is about the Holy Grail. So if you haven't read the Holy Grail of Restoration, I recommend that too. I'm going to put that into the chat as well. And I don't know if what do you see now? You still see I'm going to try to redo that with looking at the Holy Grail. So, and this also goes into the chat. So where's the chat? I'll put it in the chat in a moment. Okay. But the Holy Grail of Restoration is about the Sinai Peninsula. And what's happening here is this is what we're trying to do there. And it's to create small microclimates. And that's the reason for ecosystem restoration camps, because there's no possibility that you can do this in one place. You're going to have to, you can do it in one place, but in order to reach ecosystem scale, you have to do it over an area where it will affect at ecosystem scale. So there are several aspects of this which are necessary to understand. And we learned a lot through the Loess Plateau. There are many films there, Green Gold, Hope in a Changing Climate. You've got earlier films back in the 25 years ago, things like Line in the Sand, A Step Ahead. These are all films which are available on my academia page, which I'll also give you. So what we're seeing is that, one, it's possible to restore large-scale damaged ecosystems, and two, it's very difficult in the hardest areas. It's not that difficult in some of the areas which have not been degraded for 10 to 12,000 years. So consider California with only less than 200 years of major impacts. in California, it's possible to do quite a lot of restoration. But then you have to look at the reasons why it is degraded. And in these places, those reasons are long gone in a way. There's the belief systems that come from those reasons are still there, and so they don't allow you easily to restore, but it's easier to do the psychological work and to conceptual work to understand, well, we have to change because this is ruined. Whereas in California, a lot of people don't realize how bad it is yet. And so in dealing with the microclimates, there are three principles that I early on recognized. They're biodiversity, biomass, and accumulated organic matter. So all of the functional systems are based on an evolutionary succession that means always more biodiversity, always more biomass, always more accumulated organic matter. Because the accumulated organic matter is the decaying remains of each generation of life as it dies to nurture the next generation. So this is the basis of life and death, the cycle of life and death. So getting our mind around that and not being afraid of death and embracing conscious dying, I think, is probably a big part of this, because not embracing conscious dying means that we are denying death throughout life until that last moment. And then, of course, it's an inevitability, but that's terrible. Be conscious all the time that we're walking on the bones and the bodies of every living thing. And another thing that I would mention is that our bodies carry the roadmap of all life since the beginning of time. And that's not just true of human beings. That's true of all living things. So incorporating that into our consciousness and knowing our place in this long development of life and this relatively short human history. So we have the long history of life, and that's in our DNA. And then we have the relatively short history of human civilization developing. That's in our DNA. And that also has brought me to a philosophical thought, like, what is the role of, what is the ecological niche of human beings? So the ecological niche of Cassarina pine has made itself clear to me because it will stand in a ridiculous desert with 60-mile-an-hour winds blowing it. And when those winds come, instead of leaving the needles on to photosynthesize, it'll drop all of its needles. And then there'll be a huge pile of needles below the thing. And I hate wars, but in 1967 there was a war which interrupted my travel through the Suez Canal. I was about to go through the Suez Canal, and one day before it, they sank a French ship, and I was on a French ship getting ready to go into the canal. And so the ship had to divert itself to go around Africa. Great trip, by the way, if you ever get a chance, go by sea around Africa. You'll love it. But the thing that happened there was that the Israelis took over the Sinai Peninsula. Well, I've been now several times to the Sinai Peninsula, and what I found was that the Israelis built kibbutzes or these collective farms, and they planted Cassarina pine completely all around the farms. And now you can see that was in 1967. And if you go forward from 1967 to now, who has math skills? How many years is that? But now you can measure exactly how high the soil layer is below the Cassarina trees to understand. And in one of the films I've got in there in the chat, it's called Forests of Hope. And the thing that you want to look at in there is the work of Dr. Renee Haller, who in Kenya used Cassarina pine in coastal mining areas where they'd totally lost all the soils. So he planted Cassarina pine in slag pits. And in doing that was actually able to transition the soils. And now it's no longer Cassarina pine, it's everything. So it brought back the soils, the temperatures, and that's what we're trying to do in the Sinai as well. And that's what anybody who's going to the worst places is going to have to do, because the situation is so intense. So maybe I will stop talking and answer some questions. Maybe this has brought up some thoughts, and I can illuminate with more things. And I do. What was it that I said I needed to give you? Oh yes, I need to give you the Holy Grail. So the Holy Grail is now here.
And your link to academia site too, if you haven't got that.
I'll do that.
Or you can send it later too, of course.
It's in the bottom of it's always on my emails, but
okay, all right, we'll get it there.
It's not a problem. Okay, so what does anybody want to know about that I might be able to help with?
I actually have a question.
Yes, go.
You have a list of those plants that would live in the Death Valley, that botanical garden you were mentioning. Is there any place, or that restoration along that shelter belt in the desert, like a list of those plants?
Yes, I would look at the Great Green Wall of China. Let's go back there for just a moment then.
People with questions.
The ones that the ones that they used were in here.
Oh, great!
So, so they.
Tamarix.
Yes. Where is it? Yeah, there it is. Tamarix, whatever that is, haloxylon, and caligonum were identified as the main keystone species. And interestingly, that's not all that's there anymore. Now you have little bunnies coming into the middle of the desert because it's 25 degrees centigrade instead of 70. And you have foxes chasing them. So and well, this is another thing that they've been working on, which is to grow a useful crop. And that actually brings up something which is really important. There's several things in here that are very important. First of all, there's quite a lot of work on looking at subterranean water. And there is subterranean water surrounding the world all over the place. Some of it's fossil water going back hundreds of millions of years, where plate tectonics, then sedimentation covered, lots of different issues. But some of it's quite low down and difficult. So we're doing extreme mining for oil and petroleum. We need to stop that and leave all that in the ground, but we might need to use some of the water that's in the surface. And so high-tech solutions are emerging and are available now. There is another thing which, if you haven't seen which is Sechem. So it's quite important to look at this effort. Let's see if we stop the share and then restart the share with Sechem.
While you're doing that, I'm thinking Tamarix is an interesting plant because along the Colorado River and different places, it's actually considered an invasive that sucks the water out.
What it actually does, it outcompetes the willow, and the willow is the main food source for the beavers. So it's impactful for the beavers, which are actually part of the ecosystem.
Oh, there's that
really
too.
So we have to be really careful with the idea of introducing plants, and at the same time, there's kind of a paradigm of a war on invasives. We've got a lot to learn.
Yeah, we do.
The Tamarix outcompetes the willow.
Yeah, and the willow is a counterintuitive one because a lot of ranchers think.
To kill the Tamarix.
Well, yeah, but yes, and that's ridiculous. But willow, often people think, oh, well, it's going to suck all the water out. But if you look at where willow is growing, there's water there. It's very counterintuitive, some of these things.
So, John, could you hear Jonathan's comments? Just curious if you're picking up the conversations.
I think I heard that willow and Tamarix is and they're killing it, and the willow is also not very well understood. So I did hear a bit of that. Let me just say that I think what the task is going to be is to prepare microclimates and then link up these microclimates. So you're going to have to experiment with all sorts of things because the degree of difficulty is extremely high. And there is new monitoring equipment that's coming in. One of the things also in the Holy Grail is discussing proactive adaptive management or proactive adaptive realization. And if you work with sensors, and so I'll try to. I'm going to be spending quite a lot of time with Mian and with the weather makers, Thies van der Hoeven, who's designing the engineering and of this. But basically what's happening is there's a whole range of sensors for moisture, for pH, for all these things, and they're now becoming endemic and inexpensive. And they can stream real-time data to a computer, and they can collate a number of criteria and create a real-time graph, which can show you sort of what is happening either in a positive or negative direction for ecological function, symbiotic ecological function between all these criteria. So this is not guesswork anymore. This is moving it toward, this is not esoteric and secret knowledge.
Does anybody have some questions for John? You can step right on up here and talk into the mic, and then we'll turn the video on and see if it'll work, so John doesn't feel so isolated.
Hi, John. I'm Eunice. We met.
Hi.
I'm interested in the role of large nature preserves, thinking about them as large landscapes. Like, what is their role in restoring surrounding deserts? And, we have a much different use of land now than we did 100 years ago. I mean, most nature preserves don't have human beings in them. So how do you think about those as repositories of some sort of ecological integrity or not at the scale of deserts and large landscapes?
Yeah. Well, I'm not so much in favor of imagining that human beings are not part of nature and excluding them from the most beautiful places on the earth. I think that if we walk through the most beautiful places on the earth without damaging them, then we are enriched and we're educated. So I've been very fortunate as an ecological researcher to be able to go to some places where people are not allowed in. And those are the places where you learn the most. But if I were to kind of Aikido your question just a little bit, I would say one of the biggest and most important things that we could do is create botanical sanctuaries. So the concept of botanical sanctuaries is something that I've seen in India reach a very high level. And it's Gurukula. So I will try to put that also into the chat. Gurukula. Now, so what's interesting about this idea is it will work for everyone. Everyone can be part of this. And I would also suggest that everybody join the ecosystem restoration camps movement and lead. Everybody in that room is at the edge, because if you're thinking about Drylands, then you're at the actual edge of what has to happen. So take over the ecosystem restoration camps movement, because it's growing really fast. And the UN decade and so on is coming to this. But if we were to take all of the ecosystem restoration camps and quadruple the numbers and 100 times the numbers, and each of them has small communities working together to create botanical sanctuaries and to restore soils, hydrological function, and biodiversity, then this is where we need to be. And we need to be there now. We need to be there 10, 20 years ago, but we're not. So we got to go there now. And we can't do this alone. So we can't think of this as an egotistical exercise. Even academic work, individual academic work, doesn't seem to have much relevance to me right now. We need to have collaborative inquiry for collective intelligence.
Ooh, that was well said.
But it's not conceptual. So we need to do this in living laboratories. So the idea that anybody could make living laboratories by themselves on a planetary scale is ludicrous. We have to collaborate with one another as a species on a planetary scale. And the interesting thing about the ecosystem restoration camps is that in 5 years, this idea has been accepted in Africa, in Central America, in South America, in North America, in Europe, in Asia, in Australia. It can go worldwide, and it can go very large. So we all need to recognize that, okay, we can be part of this movement. We can, and those of you who are leaders, lead. Take this movement and lead in this movement, because we can't do it alone in one part. So we can't work we have to work in our backyards. We have to work in our communities. But that will be insufficient. That's necessary but insufficient. We have to work on a planetary scale. So then we have to have this mycelial network, which will take anything that happens and send it throughout the network. Any brainwave, any breakthrough has to go immediately. And it's almost like in the forest now we understand that the mycelial networks are sharing resources, are sending nutrients to maintain fragile members of the community. This is what we need to do now. So specifically to your question, I would say botanical sanctuaries are the way to go, but not necessarily excluding human beings. I would say human beings making it possible for these botanical sanctuaries, physically go out and gather the most endangered species very carefully without destroying anything. Gather the seeds, make cuttings, learn to do tissue culturing, because we may have to go to extreme measures for those which are the most endangered species. But once we have numerous botanical sanctuaries where people are working in service to evolution and propagating and planting out all of these very endangered species, then those are the things. And certainly for desert-like or drylands areas, you must go to the edge of the functional systems and just continuously enlarge that. So the areas which are intact are the most important ones. But they're not only important because we can go to the edge and enlarge it, they're important because they bring the inspiration and the understanding of how functional ecosystems work. And they are the repository of the legacy genome. So there's nothing more important than the type of areas that you're describing. I just would not exclude human beings from these, but the human beings who go in must never destroy them.
Yeah. And so I guess thank you. This is helping me think further. I mean, the question I have is a place like the Grand Canyon National Park or Arches National Park, I mean, are these healthy desert ecosystems? And then do we think about them as ways, I mean, we can think about those as right now as places where people don't live, but do they have all of the elements that we might want in the places where people do live in terms of predator, prey, plants, water, hydrological systems? Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's, I would say that Arches, in my experience, has quite a lot of four-wheel drive vehicles driving up and down things. No, that's not a pristine natural system. And one of the most important moments in my research was working with the U.S. Geologic Survey scientists in Utah to look at early succession soil creation. So understanding that there's a natural succession that builds up over time. So you have it can't really be described as linear because it's really about life and death. So it's consistently circular. So it's again and again, but it is accumulative. So when you are examining functional ecosystems and evolutionary succession, and then you get to a point where you're actually seeing a climax equilibrium. Now, this is not very popular in ecology right now because we're not looking at very many climax equilibriums. And so people are, but basically many scientists, many observers are studying dysfunction They're not studying functionality. They're studying dysfunctional systems. So the Colorado River has been massively altered. So no, those systems are not natural systems. Those are degraded states. And so when you look, like, I think one of the earliest other problems I had was that people didn't understand the difference between agriculture and nature. They're thinking agriculture is nature. Well, that's ridiculous. Agriculture is, agriculture is connected, I would say, to the cosmology, the Judeo-Christian Islamic cosmology, and probably all other cosmologies. But the Judeo-Christian Islamic, the Abrahamic tradition, is that human beings emerge in paradise. So somehow, magically, God said, let there be, light and all that. And then, so there is a beautiful paradise. And into this, human beings emerge. That's the cosmology. God puts them there in the garden. And in evolutionary science, you see that 4.567 billion years ago, the Earth forms with cosmic materials forming, and then it's a molten rock. It's surrounded by gases that we couldn't breathe and so on. And then over 3.8 billion years, there's cell division and photosynthesis, and then differentiation and speciation, leading to infinite potential variety in genetics. And then at the very end of that, human beings emerge because of differentiation and speciation. There is no difference between the Abrahamic cosmology and evolutionary theory from that perspective. That means that the cosmology, the beginning of that myth or that cosmology, is very important because it's borne out by a scientific analysis. But that brings the question of, like, well, in the Abrahamic tradition, human beings sinned and then were cast out of the garden.
What happened with that?
Yeah, so the snake in the apple doesn't really do it for me. But if I start to analyze, I say, well, what actually happened? And in evolutionary succession, you have biodiversity, biomass, and accumulated organic matter, which is infinitely accumulative as each generation of life dies and gives up its body to nurture the next generation. And what did humans do after they arrived? They reduced biodiversity, reduced biomass, and reduced the accumulation of organic matter. That is exactly inverting the evolutionary principles. So by inverting the evolutionary principles, you create a different outcome. What is that outcome? That outcome is desertification. So when you lose the canopies, you have elevated the surface temperatures. When you elevate the surface temperatures, you create thermic drafts, which take moisture into the upper atmospheres. In the moisture in the upper atmosphere is more than twice as impactful as CO2, as a greenhouse gas. So to discuss this concept of carbon disequilibrium in the atmosphere as human impact on the climate, just because the industrial powers that be are trying to obfuscate the reality so they can maintain power and control over the society. The economy is... My microphone...
We can still hear you.
You got you back again.
It just switches back and forth between my lovely blue emu it's going to the built-in microphone and then coming back. That's what it tells.
We'll hear you either way. So
Okay.
So, yeah, let's have somebody else pop up here with another question.
Any more questions?
Oh, we have a whole lineup. I think.
Yeah, we got a lineup of questions.
I'll be quick. Thank you for being here and all the great resources you're providing. You said experiment with different microclimates until they link up. Do you have any quick examples? Not quick, but do you have any examples that you've tried personally? Maybe your simplest thing that you've tried that you noticed made a difference?
Well, I would definitely look at Garukala Botanical Sanctuary because I consider that, and I put that into the thing. I'd look at Sikkim. I would look at these because they're very high, and I would look at the work of Renee Holler.
Okay.
So
Did I spell that right? There we go. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, another question?
It's
Come step on up.
K-U-L-A.
I can't hear you. You got to get out of your chair.
So, thanks for being here. So my main question has to do with how can we start to do ecosystem restoration on a larger scale. So it seems like a lot of your projects are partnering with governments, and then you have the ecosystem restoration camp movement. How is, in an area where, there's obviously restoration somewhat being done by governments, what's the best way to start doing it on a larger scale? Some people, save money to buy land, but I feel like that's kind of too slow and doesn't get us to the scale that we need to be at. So what would be your kind of starting points? Do you start talking to your local government? Do you just go out into the forest and start doing things on your own?
No, I think that we have to start looking at ecosystem restoration camps as a step, as a intermediate step. It's not the end, it's the beginning. So we need to engage millions and billions of people to participate in ecosystem restoration. The governments are never going to do this because the governments have too bureaucratic and they have this concept of domination. We have to be careful with this because humanity needs to restore all degraded lands on the earth. Those in power like to be in power. That's their plan. And so if their idea is stay in power and their second idea is restore degraded lands on the earth, that's an inversion. We need to flip this. You're not in power. And anyway, who's in power? What are you talking about? Power. Why are we talking about power? Let's talk about individual sovereignty, human rights, climate justice, all of these things. These are the critical things. So I would say ecosystem restoration camps are just places to come together where a community can start talking and working together immediately. Because you have to work immediately. But then the next step becomes very important. I would say...
What is your vision of that next step?
The next step is community land trusts where the people have decided to work together for the rest of their lives. I think in my experience, it's a good idea to date before you get married a little bit, because if you're going to spend the rest of your life with someone, it would be a very good idea if you know them quite well. So ecosystem restoration camps can allow us to start working immediately. And it's not about just restoring within the camp. It's about training cores of people who can do restoration everywhere. And that collaborative nature of that is really helpful. And at the same time, in some ways, you absolutely, regardless of what happens, I mean, we're facing the potential of catastrophic outcomes. So creating central kitchens, creating the ability to feed large numbers of people, the ability to process surplus food, and the compassion and the belief systems that say, well, like, nobody in our community is going to be hungry. That's terrible. So these are the things that we need to do at the same time that we're restoring soil, hydrological function, and biodiversity. So it's a healing of the human spirit as well as a healing of the landscapes. So I think that community land trusts that bring people together because they've already got the skills, because they've been in the ecosystem restoration camp movement, and they're teaching as many people as they possibly can all the time. And it's not a business model. It's a required societal exercise, which, if it works, can transform the economy to ensure that ecological function is valued higher than material things. Now, when that happens, all human activity will go toward ecosystem function because it's more valuable than anything else you can do. Yeah.
So that's great. So basically, ecosystem restoration camps is kind of a networking tool / movement to start bringing a lot of individual projects together to form a networking entity, if you will, so that people can share resources, share skills, share what works, what didn't work, and have like a way of communicating and also creating, I don't know if you want to call it a socio-political entity where it becomes actually a movement. Is that kind of what you're envisioning?
I think it is a movement, and I think what it is actually empowering people to have significant roles in restoration. So anybody who understands this now, how are you going to have a significant role in restoration? Well, I can tell you, as soon as I started to understand that it was possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems, I thought, well, I have to tell this to everybody. And people were like, get off of me. Who are you again? Leave me alone. And so you're going to have to be prepared for a marathon. It's our lives, and then it's future generations. So it's not really an egotistical thing. It's an understanding that human consciousness and human civilization is in a transformational moment in history where this will determine survival, not just sustainability, but survival. And so we're all obligated to do this. And I think it's empowerment of as many people as possible. And at the same time, it's a recognition that the indigenous people all over the world, their cosmology was different than materialism is more valuable than life. And it's very different from like, I stole it and it's mine, which is the justification for all of the colonialization and so on that's been going on. That's ridiculous. These principles that are false and iniquitous and wrong have got to be discussed together. But at the same time, we've got to restore the soil, the water, and the biodiversity. We can't wait. So we have to start as fast. We have to go as fast as we can. We do have to go to the next stage after ecosystem restoration camps, but I doubt if you're going to be able to jump over that step because you have to train millions and billions of people in ecosystem restoration.
So if I might humbly bring us back to the question, boots on the ground, folks, we're doing some things that are, I believe, empowering and leading by example. So, for example, EcoCamp Coyote noticed that they were putting herbicides next to the camp
for reducing the fuel load of grasses. And so they made a deal with the city to go out there and do fuel load reduction with mechanical processes, saws and chippers. And they're maintaining a mile of railroad track behind the camp by speaking, and it's a win-win situation. What I'm in the process of doing is discussing with the management of the Forest Service and the boots on the ground folks. I met with the bear team. I met with the head culturalist. I speak with the ranger, who is the head district ranger in the area. We're on first name basis. And I'm encouraging them to understand what my motivations are, which are their motivations. It doesn't matter what Congress is actually doing, because Congress can't keep track of these large bureaucracies. But I tell you, the people who are working in the forests, they're in this with us and they want to be our allies. I had some Forest Service firefighters respond to a call last winter because someone saw smoke on my property. And they offered to come and help me with brush clearing on their spare time. So there are no enemies. We're all in this together. No matter what our political orientation or religious orientation is, talk to people, hang out with them, share with them, invite them over for a beer or a meal or whatever. Get to know your neighbors. That's the first step. We can't blow this out of proportion and be overwhelmed by how big the project is. How do you eat an elephant? You start with the first bite.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Hallelujah.
Okay, it's your turn. So we got another question here. You can step right on, squeeze over here.
All right, just quickly, I was wondering where the slag. Thank you. I'm wondering where the slag pits are that you mentioned that were converted with that particular variety
Cassarina.
Yes, Cassarina pine.
That's
yes.
That's in Mombasa, Kenya.
Okay.
And the film, you can look at the film, which is the link to which is in the chat. It's called Forests of Hope.
Excellent. Great. And do you, just quickly, do you have experience working with copper mines or any kind of mining, like transitioning?
Well, I think that we're seeing this emerge now. There's a new camp being set up in Kentucky, which, write to me. I'm going to put all my contact information into the thing, but the new camp is 7,000 acres, and it's responding to mountaintop removal. And it's in the poorest areas of Kentucky. The nearest town is Lovely. That's the name, Lovely. And it's where Lyndon Johnson went to declare the war on poverty. That didn't go so well. They're still desperately poor there. And now the mountaintops have been removed and there's a lot of toxicity and degradation. But it is hopeful. It's like 1 million acres or more that need to be done, but there's 7,000 acres and a camp being set up there. And that can start a movement which could end up with hundreds or thousands of camps. And it can address full employment. It can address, and if we can get to the point where the economy changes. So most people can't imagine this because they can imagine the end of the world before they can imagine that capitalism is wrong. But the fact is that materialism, taking away all isms, just the idea that things are more valuable than life, is ridiculous. And so that's where I think we need to be. And when we can look at it rationally and logically, we have to say functional ecosystems are vastly more valuable than anything that human beings have ever made and everything that human beings will ever make. So how could our economy be based on things and buying and selling things And then at the same time, we're allowing for speculation between the cost and price of things and interest-bearing debt, which is just nothing but a magical concept to enslave people. So let's drop those things, the materialism and the slavery, and let's look at what's real. And what's real is we're going to die, we're living, and it's beautiful. We live in the most beautiful planet in the universe, as far as I can tell. We've been looking everywhere, and we don't find any other ones with oxygenated atmospheres and fresh flowing water and beautiful fertile soils and amazing biodiversity. So let's honor that, and let's recognize that that's the basis of true value. If that's the basis of true value, it has to be the basis of our economy. If that is the basis of our economy, you can't degrade, you can't pollute. We're incentivized to maintain nature. So that is what I think is the main thing. And those who are willing to work in drylands, they're taking on the hardest task. That's what I see.
Well, also, I want to say something to your question. In the early days of Bioneers, that's where I met John. We're co-Bioneers. And in the early days, the main focus of the conference was on ecosystem restoration. And one of the most inspiring presentations, and I can't even remember who it was, but it was about cleaning up copper mining camps or copper mining situation. And what they did, it was so simple. All they did was it required a lot of equipment, but they took big boulders of limestone and they ran the runoff from the copper mines, which was super acidic, through this whole filter of large limestone rocks. And that did the trick. Just saying, there are some simple fixes.
Okay, I want to talk to both of you about that more.
Okay.
Because I have a copper gold, a copper mine in southern Arizona that I would like to hopefully address.
Sweet.
I've put my contact information into the chat. Feel free to write to me. I think that the best idea is to try to create ecosystem restoration camps so that you don't have to do things by yourself, that you have maybe 100 or 150 people helping you.
Great. Okay, sweet. So I have a note from Ryan, who I guess didn't want to step into the center of the circle, but I'll just read it. It says, my question is in regard to access, time, and the context of capitalism that compels us to earn a living, how absent governmental support can we get millions of people to engage with ecosystem restoration at the scale of the Earth's needs without abandoning our other responsibilities? Did you understand the question?
Yes, I get that, and I think we're all faced with that. So that's the question that's facing every individual who does this. But I would say that it's now about 3 decades since I left journalism to focus on ecosystems and ecosystem restoration. And I can tell you that over the last 3 decades, there's been a massive change. And that change is in science, and it's in policy, and it's in landscapes, and then the next stage of this is in economics. Because when the economics recognizes that ecological function is more valuable than things, then you're incentivized to do restoration. So everyone who gets the skills necessary to do restoration can be employed forever and be part of training everybody on the earth to do this. But in my own case, what I noticed was the best strategy is selflessness. And, if I were to say I don't believe in material things and take a begging bowl and walk from camp to camp, that's probably the most effective thing that I can do. But it's not possible to ask other people to be selfless. And the chance of being crucified is high. So you can't ask people to be crucified either. So I think the next best is ecosystem restoration camps. Because if you put together central kitchens and you all agree to care for one another, and I would add something else, I would add creator spaces that allow you to build everything. So you'd have woodworking, metalworking, and mechanical and industrial sewing. And you start with your community and you make the central kitchen first, and then you make everybody have a tent, and then gradually you replace the tents with maybe uncoated, in California, 10 by 12 foot sheds with a second story that allows for loft space. But you're not cooking there. You're doing that in the central kitchens, and so on and so on. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So I just want to say thank you, John, because your video of regreening the desert is what got me here and actually sparked the whole interest. So you did that. But my question is cattle farmers. Do you have any suggestions with dealing with cattle farmers? You know, especially the bigger ones, because I also ran to the desert and tried to do it out there with cows. So
yeah, I think. I think that Alan Savory is got quite a lot of knowledge and information, and that he's essentially correct from an evolutionary perspective. There's coevolution in steppe-lands, savanna, grasslands, and
grazers.
Yeah, so you need ungulates because they're contributing the microbial. Their gut bacteria becomes soil biota, and without that, you're gonna go toward desertification and have no soils. And when you go to no soils and no vegetation, you're going to have increased temperatures. So you need to have these animals, but you need to do it. It's not that, I mean, it's not, if you don't use the methods that allow the animals to move, so if you're substituting domesticated ungulates for wild animals, and you've broken up the grasslands so that there are fences, then you don't exactly have the conditions that you need unless you do biomimicry by moving the animals. And I have definitely seen an 8-year-old blowing a whistle and moving 3,000 cattle from one paddock to another, and it works well. And, you know, that's the most beautiful grassland systems, and that's the best meat you can possibly have, too. So
I've also, I was interested in, you know, we've incorporated the cow and imported the cow or the cattle beast, which comes from the water buffalo, and they consume a huge amount of water. What if we brought in like something like an eland or some animal that doesn't require that much water and start shifting over to that? You know, it's just an idea.
In Africa, this has not been allowed often because you can't tell the difference between bushmeat and domesticated wild animals, you know, if you domesticate wild animals. But if you look at Renee Holler in Forests of Hope, you'll also see that he's recommending this and that he's able to grow everything. And it is a really remarkable thing. And I again would recommend ecosystem restoration camps as places where they're autonomous, self-organizing, self-governing, so you're doing whatever you want to do. But that is a living laboratory where you can get 100 or 150 people to work together, and then you can experiment with different ways of doing things.
Any other questions? Come a step on up.
Thank you.
Ali.
So John, I think that we're going to end here at about 11. So we will have a couple more questions, and then maybe some wrap up time from you to close up here. So let's say at 11 we're going to switch over. But oh my gosh, it's been lovely. Thank you.
Okay, so we got another question here.
Hi, John.
I have beard envy.
He's only 3 days old. Now I'm wondering, what do you think about, or have you done any work on the African green wall where they're trying to build across from Senegal to Sudan? And like over there's a lot of, from what I understood, there's a huge fossil water resource. Like from going from Egypt to Libya, it's like, I think the amount of water is as big as the Great Lakes.
Right.
Available. That's fairly shallow.
Yeah. I've been in Mali, Ghana, Senegal, Mauritania, Morocco, and all the way over to the east in Ethiopia and Somalia and other parts of the Horn of Africa. But the most important work I've seen over there is called farmer-based natural regeneration. And what this does, go ahead.
That's in Senegal, or?
That's throughout a range of areas. Actually, I was asked to, let me see if I can find it for you.
That's Chris Rege's work, is that right?
No, it's, I'll find it for you, just a moment. Yeah, sorry. I would like to not be so old, but I'm old. So it will take me a moment. By the way, if you get to watch the thing about Mali, that's also very good for drylands. All of these things are in here. But farmer-based regeneration, where is it? Water. Oh, here's Tamara, by the way, might be very useful for.
Is that because of Sepp Holzer's water adoption landscape project there?
Darn it. It's not coming up. So, anyway, the farmer-based natural regeneration recognized that tree planting in those extreme areas is not going very well, and it's something that you definitely need to be aware of. So if you can understand how to do tree planting, that's good. But farmer-based natural regeneration is looking for functional root systems that coppice. And the coppicing of the traditional plants and legacy genome works better than...
Vested. Morale began to...
Okay, so this is it. Farmer-based natural regeneration is coming into this thing, and I would say again, because of the desiccation, hot winds. Like if you go to Mauritania now, it's appalling. You know, you'll have massive dust storms, and you'll have this hot winds blowing in, and everything is desiccated. You need to create shelter belts the way that the Chinese did. And you probably need to do it repeatedly. So you either have the most robust alien species, or you encourage the legacy genome by using this farmer-based natural regeneration, which is essentially finding living root systems and not keep cutting them down for agriculture. And you can get the forest back in areas that have those roots within 5 years, 7 years.
So, John, I did point out the farmer-based natural regeneration to him last night and how that works, but I didn't have that term for it at the time. So,
well, there's a video right there in the chat now, if you want to look at it.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. Okay, I have another card, a little follow-up.
Well, let's say, John, maybe just the whole concept of using fossil water to reestablish, because we're so concerned with drawing down the world's aquifers for irrigation. It's such a big problem. Where if we run all the aquifers out of water, we can't do that. But fossil water is a little different if it's not being utilized. So you figure it's a good idea to take fossil water out to reestablish the life on the surface again. That's a good trade-off.
Well, I wouldn't put words in my mouth, please, Michael, but I'm not necessarily in favor of sucking all the fossil water out of the ground. What I want to see happen is to restore the lower hydrological cycle. And in order to do that, we have to create microclimates. And then we have to link those microclimates up into a scale which alters condensation and precipitation on a regional basis. This is probably the minimum of that will be something like 100 square kilometers, so 10 kilometers by 10 kilometers. And when you understand critical mass for condensation and precipitation, there's certain conditions which are basically the percentages of moisture to air, somewhere in the neighborhood of 22 grams of moisture, something in that region, maybe 22 to 25 grams of air per kilogram of moisture per kilogram of air. And you also need nucleation. So the interesting thing about nucleation for cloud formation and forming of raindrops is that the best case is exudates from respiration in plants. So it's all about returning the plant material for lowering the temperatures on the surface for respiration and nucleation of the clouds and raindrops. So, yeah.
So John, you'll be happy to hear that my goal here is to train people how to restore the drylands without taking up fossil water. So that's not part of the curriculum here.
Good.
Okay, I want to clarify for the group. Fossil water is water that gets into the aquifer only through the Ice Age epochs. It doesn't just come in through rain cycles. It's like the Oglala aquifer, like that came in from the Pleistocene era, and now that that's polluted, you can't restore that unless it's through thousands of years to replenish these aquifers, and that's why it's called fossil water.
You know, there's some other things. I mean, I'm not really a giant fan of abiotic systems, and we are working with Dr. John Todd. I don't know if you all know who that is, but
that his son or John?
No, Dr. John Todd, the father, and so we're developing systems that can do passive desalinization in the desert. So we can take seawater and put it into growing halophytes and growing aquatic life in controlled situations inside of domes, which increase the evaporation rates in a controlled system and then capture the fresh water. So you're removing the salts in numerous ways through growing aquatic life, through growing sea plants or aquatic plants, and through filtration and through evaporation. And then that water can be used together with the soils which are coming out of the dredging work in Lake Bardaville. I recommend everybody read The Holy Grail of Restoration, which is also in the chat. And then when we do this, we can use the moisture that we gather from these eco machines to grow, propagate and plant out restorative systems on land-based systems, and we can use the sediments for soil creation.
And we'll talk more about John Todd's work later in the course. And the other thing I just want to clarify, halophytes are plants that are very salt tolerant and actually take up salts and sequester salts from the soil and absorb them into their bodies. And then we have one last question that somebody brought up. It's a follow-up. I think it's looks like from the handwriting, it looks like it's from the same person that asked the last one. How is asking people to be selfless, which you acknowledged we can only ask of ourselves, different from asking people to dedicate months or hopefully years of their life to ecological restoration camps if at the end of their time they have no additional financial or housing security? How do we find the money to pay people for their sacred work of ecological restoration?
Yeah, I think that I can't ask anybody to be selfless, and I wouldn't ask anybody to be selfless. Please do not be selfless. Do whatever you want to do. But the main thing is I have recognized that because the economy and the dominant economic and political system exists in terms of realpolitik, if I want to do something that's completely counter to that, then the best case is selflessness, because it's unlikely that the dominant political and economic system wants to commit, to make itself obsolete. So the way forward, I think, is for those people who understand and value ecological function, to work together to restore ecological function as rapidly and as widely as possible. And at the same time, when we change society, and I can say in the last 3 decades since I've been working on this, the situation is different now than it was then. So I would say that gradually what's going to happen is the value of ecological function will be seen to be the most valuable thing. I mean, if we're facing existential threats from human-induced climate change, what is the value of natural regulation of the climate? Well, it's off the scale. It can't even be seen. So if you understand that and you value it, then you don't ask whether other people value it or not. You listen to your own heart and you do what you think is right. And if you come together in communities and you care for one another and you do the most valuable thing in the world, then I think you're going to become the most valuable communities in the world. And the rest of the world, when they wake up, are going to go, hey, we got to do that. And the economy is going to shift, and all of these big buildings and all of these corporations and all of these abiotic systems are going to be recognized as just junk and ruins. They're the pyramids of the future. So I don't really want to spend my life building the pyramids of the future. I want to make sure that my children and grandchildren and future generations of all life have fully functional ecosystems. So we're obligated to do that. And I don't think it's up to me or any other individual to answer how human civilization is going to pay you for something. But I think if we all work together, that we can make sure that everybody eats and that everybody is housed and that everybody is psychologically and physically healthy, and that we're having as much fun as we possibly can. And that's the best way to live. And when the world comes around to understanding that that's the best way to live, it will value it too. And that will change the economy and change society, and human civilization will survive. And of course, if we don't do this, then all bets are off. So I would say ecosystem restoration camps are the best case in any situation. So if the existing political and economic system collapses, you definitely want to be with 150 people who care about you, love you, and plan to ensure that everybody shares if there's any food, that everybody takes care of everybody. And you probably don't want too many people, but you don't want too few either. So you probably want about 150 people. So lots and lots of ecosystem restoration camps with 150 people preparing to create community land trusts where everybody helps everybody to build houses the way the Amish do, and that can also grow their own food, process any surplus food, and train people in ecosystem restoration. This is the most valuable thing that anybody can do now on the planet. And we're obligated. There's no other way. So I can't imagine not doing this now.
Well, it sounds like in addition to eco restoration, we also have to practice ego system restoration as well.
I think we have to go from ego to eco is the reality. That's yeah.
Sweet. Okay.
Well, thank you, John. Looks like that was some pretty good parting remarks there. So I think we're good to go. We could listen to you for a long time, but we've got a lot of curriculum to go over here and a lot of the practical details of how we're gonna do this. So we'll be sending you further information as we go.
Very inspiring. Don't you think?
Thanks so much.
Many blessings on your journey, John.
Thank you.
Angels be with you.